Welcome to the Papyrus Global TV World News Update. We bring you a comprehensive look at the most consequential stories shaping world affairs. High-stakes nuclear diplomacy in Geneva, renewed peace negotiations in Europe's longest ongoing war, the passing of an international civil rights icon, and a serious security incident at one of the world's most iconic democratic symbols in Washington, D.C. Here are our top 4 stories. Iran and the United States report progress in nuclear negotiations in Geneva. Trilateral peace talks between Ukraine, Russia and the US resume in Geneva amid ongoing war. Civil rights leader Jesse Jackson has died at age 84, prompting global tributes. A suspect was arrested after approaching the United States Capitol with a loaded shotgun. We now take you into the full stories. The second round of indirect nuclear negotiations between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States concluded this week in Geneva, Switzerland, under intense international scrutiny. Senior Iranian diplomat, Foreign Minister Syed Abbas Araghchi, described the session as constructive, saying Tehran and Washington reached an understanding on a set of guiding principles intended to form the basis of a future accord. The talks were hosted at the Omani Embassy in Geneva under the mediation of Omani Foreign Minister Saeed Badr bin Hamad Al Busaidi, with the US delegation led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Senior Advisor Jared Kushner. Iran has signaled a willingness to consider diluting its 60% enriched uranium stockpile, a significant concession, while insisting it will not accept zero enrichment on its soil or discuss limits to its ballistic missile arsenal. Perspectives under President Donald J. Trump: any deal must include meaningful constraints that demonstrably reduce the risk of Tehran developing a nuclear weapon. Trump has publicly warned of very traumatic consequences for Iran if a deal fails, and recently ordered a bolstered US military presence in the region, including additional aircraft carriers and fighter jets. The talks come amidst heightened regional tensions. Iran temporarily closed parts of the Strait of Hormuz during military exercises, a strategic choke point for roughly 20% of global seaborne oil trade, and conducted live-fire drills involving the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC). Economically, markets responded to the Geneva progress with a dip in oil prices as geopolitical risks softened slightly, but instability in the Gulf continues to fuel uncertainty among traders. Despite reaching mutual principles, both sides acknowledge major gaps remain. Iran will now prepare detailed proposals within the next 2 weeks to try to bridge these differences, and negotiators plan a third round of talks. Iranian officials framed the talks as a chance to secure sanctions relief and economic reopening after years of hardship. US diplomats stressed the need for verifiable limits that ensure Iran cannot develop a nuclear weapon. Regional states, particularly Israel and Gulf Arab allies, remain wary, demanding that any deal also address Iran's missile forces and support for militant proxies. In Geneva, Switzerland, a new round of trilateral peace talks between the Ukraine, Russia and the United States resumed this week with hopes of finding a path towards ending the nearly 4-year war that has devastated millions. The first day of discussions lasted more than 5 hours, with the American delegation pressing both sides to focus on practical issues that could lay the groundwork for a later, more comprehensive agreement. Ukrainian officials, including Rustem Umerov, Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, stated the talks would address security guarantees, humanitarian aid corridors, and steps to reduce civilian suffering. European diplomats from Germany, the United Kingdom, and France also attended, underlining broad Western interest in a settlement. However, the context on the battlefield complicates diplomacy. Just hours before talks begin, Russian forces launched heavy strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure in multiple regions, including the port city of Odessa, leaving tens of thousands without power or heat. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attacks as an attempt to weaken Kyiv's negotiating position. The negotiators are expected to meet again on February 18th, but key issues such as territorial control, especially in the Donbas region, security guarantees, and future military alignments remain deeply contested. Zelensky has emphasized that any lasting peace deal must include guarantees that ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and protection from future aggression. Global civil rights movement are mourning the loss of Jesse Jackson, who has died at the age of 84. Jackson was a towering figure in 20th century activism, a close associate of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and one of the first African Americans to mount serious presidential campaigns in the United States. His work spanned decades of advocacy for economic justice, voting rights, and racial equity. Leaders from around the world have issued tributes, noting Jackson's role in inspiring generations of activists and political leaders. Obituaries highlight his impact on expanding political participation, his international outreach on human rights issues, and the enduring legacy he leaves within global movements for justice. In Washington, D.C., law enforcement officials arrested a suspect after the individual ran towards the United States Capitol with a loaded shotgun. No injuries were reported, but the incident triggered an immediate lockdown and heightened security protocols around the Capitol complex. The Capitol, seat of the U.S. Congress, has been a focal point of security concerns in recent years, and this event underscores ongoing challenges in protecting high-profile democratic institutions. Authorities are investigating the suspect's motives and any possible broader threats. Lawmakers have expressed concerns over lapses in security, while officials stress that rapid response prevented a potential tragedy. Global financial markets responded cautiously to developments in Geneva. On Wall Street in New York, the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500 closed slightly lower, reflecting investor uncertainty despite reports of progress in Iran-US nuclear negotiations. Meanwhile, safe haven asset gold prices fell modestly, signaling a temporary easing of geopolitical risk sentiment. Energy markets remain highly sensitive. Brent crude futures fluctuated throughout the trading sessions as traders weighed two opposing forces: the possibility of sanctions relief on Iranian oil exports, which could increase global supply, continued instability in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, which keeps risk premiums elevated. Market analysts at major institutions in London and Frankfurt noted that while diplomatic progress is encouraging, headline optimism has not yet translated into structural certainty. Investors remain wary of breakdowns in negotiations or sudden escalations on the Ukraine battlefield. In Asia, markets in Tokyo and Shanghai opened mixed, reflecting global caution. Currency markets also showed volatility, with the US dollar strengthening slightly as traders sought stability. The broader economic implication: diplomacy is beginning to influence capital flows, but confidence remains fragile. Operations have resumed at Vilnius Airport in Lithuania after temporary restrictions were imposed due to unidentified aerial objects detected near controlled airspace. Lithuanian aviation authorities activated precautionary safety measures, suspending select arrivals and departures while air defense systems assess the potential threat. The Baltic region remains on heightened alert due to proximity to Russia and Belarus. NATO officials have not confirmed any hostile intent, but acknowledged that airspace vigilance has intensified since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. Lithuania, a NATO member state, has increased radar monitoring and coordinated closely with alliance partners in Poland and Latvia. While the disruption was brief, the event underscores the fragile security environment in Eastern Europe. Investigations into the object's origin are ongoing, and officials emphasize there is no current threat to civilian aviation. An independent United Nations body has issued a strong statement condemning what it describes as intimidation and harassment directed at a UN Special Rapporteur monitoring Palestinian human rights conditions. The controversy centers around criticisms of investigative reports examining civilian impact in Gaza and the West Bank. Several governments have challenged the findings, arguing that rapporteurs' office demonstrated bias, while human rights organizations defend the independence of the mandate. At UN headquarters in Geneva, spokesperson emphasized that special rapporteurs must operate without political interference. Diplomatic sources say the dispute has intensified broader tensions within the Human Rights Council. The issue highlights a recurring debate. Supporters argue independent oversight is essential for accountability. Critics claim some UN mechanisms disproportionately target specific states. The disagreement continues to reflect wider geopolitical divisions within the international community. The United States diplomatic corps is currently engaged in simultaneous high-stakes negotiations across Europe and Middle East. From Geneva's nuclear talks to Ukraine-Russia mediation efforts, American envoys are navigating overlapping crises with global consequences. Senior foreign policy analysts in Washington say the challenge lies in balancing deterrence with diplomacy. The US must reassure NATO allies, manage Middle Eastern stability, and respond to emerging tensions in Asia, all while maintaining domestic political consensus. European leaders in Berlin and Paris have called for sustained American engagement, stressing that US leadership remains central to transatlantic security. However, some critics argue that Washington's multi-front diplomatic commitments risk overstretch, particularly if conflicts escalate simultaneously. The coming weeks will test whether diplomatic momentum can be sustained without triggering new flashpoints. In cities such as Cologne and Düsseldorf, Germany's annual carnival celebrations turned sharply political this year. Large parade floats depicted exaggerated caricatures of global leaders, addressing themes ranging from war in Ukraine to energy shortages and migration policy. Organizers insist that satire has always been central to the carnival tradition, serving as a public outlet for political commentary. However, some depictions sparked criticism from foreign embassies and political figures who viewed them as provocative. Political satire in Germany has deep cultural roots, dating back centuries, often functioning as a pressure valve during times of tension. This year's displays reflect Europe grappling with inflation, security concerns, and shifting alliances. While mostly festive, the carnival highlights how deeply global politics now influences cultural expression. In a closely watched legal decision, a U.S. federal judge ordered the reinstatement of a museum exhibit focused on the history of slavery after it had been removed following public complaints. The court ruling emphasized constitutional protections and the importance of preserving historical integrity in public institutions. The case reignited national debates about how history, particularly painful chapters, should be presented. Advocates for a reinstatement argue that confronting history honestly is necessary for societal growth. Opponents contend that presentation context matters and must avoid politicization. Legal scholars note that the ruling may set precedent for similar disputes across state and local institutions. Conversations continue across universities, museums, and public forums nationwide, reflecting ongoing cultural divisions about identity, memory, and national narrative. From financial markets reacting to diplomacy to security concerns in Eastern Europe to cultural and legal debates in Western democracies, tonight's development underscores the interconnected nature of global events. These stories, together with our earlier top headlines, illustrate a world navigating negotiation, instability, remembrance, and institutional challenges. Stay with the Papyrus Global TV as we continue delivering the most comprehensive global coverage. I am Christiana Babayo. Thank you for staying with us.